Welcome, Miami-Dade College. All right, we're videotaping this. So what I'd like you to do is please make sure your cell phones are turned off, okay? So we don't have any interruptions during the talk, so if you're not quite sure about whether or not the cell phone is turned off, please make sure that you do so. Okay, I'd like to thank everybody who helped me get set up on the Quick here. I thank my department secretary. I thank Professors Arca and Professors Fink, of course, for being here, offering this perhaps as extra credit. Thank you for being here, for coming to my talk today. Thank the setup crew. I thank Marco Urquidi for taping this. Thank you all for making this possible. Okay, I promise to both inform and to entertain you today. But most of all, I hope to make you think today. For my talk today is an exercise in critical thinking. I teach critical thinking for a living. What is it? Well, critical thinking is disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by the evidence. Philosophy itself, I'm a philosophy teacher. Many of you are taking philosophy courses. Philosophy itself is all about critical thinking. We have courses, Philosophy 2604. Some of you are probably taking that particular course. That is a course on critical thinking. And critical thinking is one of the 10 learning outcomes of Miami-Dade College. It's number 3. Solving problems using critical and creative thinking and scientific reasoning. That's one of the things you're supposed to be able to do at the end of your tenure here at Miami-Dade College. And further, we ought to engage. We ought to engage in critical thinking. We have a moral obligation to. For morality demands we do the right thing. But you can't know what the right thing is unless you do some critical thinking. So let's do some critical thinking today. The talk is called Translogic. I'm Dr. Mark Nunder, and I'm going to be discussing this principle. The principle is, if you identify as an X, then you are an X, and you should be treated as an X. So I call this the Translogic principle. You could call it the self-identity rule. The idea here is, if you self-identify as an X, then you are an X, and you should be treated as an X, whatever you plug in for X. Now, this sort of principle is behind some of the things we see in the last couple of years among, for example, the transgender movement. And so one application of this translogic principle, or this self-identify rule, is to transgenderism. And just to get definitions straight here, transgender people experience a mismatch between their gender identity and their assigned sex. And for further definitions and clarity and distinctions, let's make a distinction here between sex and gender. Sex being the biological distinction of an organism between male, female, or intersex, defined by the gametes it produces or the reproductive organs that it has. That's sex, considered as a biological type of characteristic. Then we have gender. Gender now is defined as sort of the range of characteristics pertaining to and differentiating between such things as masculinity and femininity. So sex on the one hand, and then you have gender on the other hand. So a transgender person feels a mismatch between the gender that they identify with or identify as and perhaps their sex, their biological sex. All right, so again, the translogic principle, if you identify as an X, then you are an X, and you should be treated as an X. And so the idea is, if a transgender person identifies as, let's suppose they were biologically a male, and yet they identify as a female, then they are a female and should be treated as a female. For example, in the famous case that was in the media all over last year, Bruce Jenner, who was a 1976 Olympian decathlon gold medalist, very famous athlete, who is now Caitlyn Jenner. He identifies as a female and has made an initial transformation into his self-identity as a female. Okay, so I ended up going to last semester, November it was, to Transgender 101. This was a workshop held here at Miami-Dade College, and it was facilitated by this transgender person, Matt Adams. He is a female to male transgender. And I asked him, look, why should we accept that because you identify, or I asked him, why should we accept that you should be treated as a female? And he said, well, something along the lines of this translogic principle. Well, this is how I identify. I identify this way, and therefore I ought to be treated this way. And that's exactly what Caitlyn Jenner says, that she identifies this way and should be, therefore, treated this way. They identify as a particular X, and so they are, therefore, real X's, and therefore ought to be treated as real X's. If you identify as an X, then you are an X, and you should be treated as an X. All right, now this got me to thinking this particular principle, because it's also going to apply to other types of cases too. Here's a person who identifies as agender. This is Laura Graham, and this person had breasts and uterus surgically removed to become agender, or non-binary it's sometimes called, or neutral. So Laura Graham identifies as genderless, and so try to make a transformation into precisely how she identifies. So if she identifies as, or if Laura Graham identifies as agender, then Laura Graham is agender, ought to be treated agender. There's also cases of bigenderism, sometimes called gender fluid, and some of these definitions are sometimes hard to distinguish. Gender queer is sometimes used. Pangender is sometimes used. This particular person identifies as bigender. That is both male and female, and will switch back and forth during the weeks, during the months. Okay, sometimes Layla Warlow, sometimes Leighton Warlow. And there's no regularity with the transformation. It's, however, she strongly identifies that particular day. That is the gender that she is. So, again, the rule. If you identify as an X, you are an X. Should be treated as such. All right, now this led me further to think of other types of cases. A couple of famous cases that were in the news again last year, 2 cases of this. Here's Gail Newland. Now, Gail Newland is biologically female, but identifies as male. And she ended up going online on like some type of match or dating.com type of thing, and she met a biological female. Okay, and this Gail Newland identifies as male, so represented herself as male. She identifies as male, therefore is a male. Identified, so represented herself as a male, ends up hooking up with a biological female, and ends up having sex with the person, but insists that the person wears a blindfold. That Gail Newland here is conscious of her body, insists her female partner wears a blindfold, and whenever they engage in sex. So this happens several times, and then finally one time, the partner ends up pulling off the blindfold and sees that Gail Newland has a strap-on dildo and is having sex with her. And so freaks out, and so ends up going to the authorities about this, and she was charged as assault with an object, okay? Yes. Assault with an object, okay? Physical assault, namely that the person did not consent to penetration with a dildo. You follow me? Now, this seems, my initial take to this, my initial response is there's something not right about this. Identifies as a male, therefore says they are a male by the translogic principle, and so therefore, a defender of this principle, and therefore Gail Newland will say, well, Gail Newland is a male. And so there is no fraud, there's no misrepresentation, you have a male here. That's how Gail Newland identifies. Same case came up with this person, Karen Lee. Also a female to male, hooks up with somebody, okay, again with a strap-on dildo, okay, the person didn't realize this, the person was not wearing a blindfold, okay, but it was all under covers or, in the dark, and so had sex, and then everything was okay, but then the partner ends up seeing Karen Lee in some type of female attire or something like this at like a mall and freaks out and brings charges against Karen Lee. Similar charges here with some type of assault with an object. Yeah.
There was no consent from the beginning to have sex with a strap-on.
Right.
So for them to charge her, they didn't hear or anything like her strapping on or.
Apparently not. No. Okay. Well, those are the facts. And by the way, the court agreed with these facts. Okay, that this is how it turned out. Okay, both of them were convicted. So there was evidence substantial enough to indicate that this is the case. All right. So again, on this principle, they have not done anything wrong, it appears to me. At least in terms of, look, you may say, well, there's no consent for the dildo, but still, don't you think there's been some misrepresentation beyond just the action with the dildo? They're representing themselves as male because they identify as male, and so the understanding is I'm with a male. Beyond the dildo, is there something wrong there? Okay, I'm gonna leave that till questions at the end, right? Because I want to get through this because we had a late start to begin with, okay? There will be a Q&A period at the end, if I can get it in there. That's what I'm planning on. Okay. Now the next case was a transracial case. This came out several months after Caitlyn Jenner's transformation. We have a case of Rachel Dolezal. Rachel Dolezal was a president of an NAACP chapter, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, an African American advancement organization. She identifies as black. Now, her parents ended up coming forward saying, this is not true. Her parents are completely white. They have no African American in their backgrounds. She has represented herself as African American, as a head of this chapter, okay, teaches African American studies, all right, went to Howard University, a historically black college, has a degree there, and so this came out, and there was outrage in the media about this. How could she think this was okay to do? This is fraud. But look, on the translogic principle, if you identify as an X, then you are an X, and you should be treated as an X. She identifies as black, so she is black, and should be treated as such. And the question is, how can you distinguish the Dolezal case here from the transgender cases that we've seen? By the way, forced to resign the presidency of this particular chapter because of the outrage. But there's lots of other cases. I mean, we're talking about this translogic principle. If you identify as an X, then you are an X and should be treated as such. Other cases immediately are implied in this principle. Will this principle always give you true results? If it does not, if it gives you false implications, then the principle itself is false. Here's a trans Indian. Apparently there's lots of them. They even got a name now for them, Pretendians. They identify as Native American Indians, but they have no such ancestry in their background. This person, Susan Taft Reed, she was some type of director of a Native American program at Dartmouth College. Fired because there was no proof of her Native American ancestry. That's how she identifies, but that college says, well, that's not enough for you to be a real Indian. Another famous case is Iron Eyes Cody. People of my generation, perhaps Dr. Fink remembers this, very famous commercial, pollution commercial, in which this guy is crying. A Native American Indian sees the pollution of our American civilization, turns to the camera, and you see this famous tear, okay? Identified as Native American Indian, had all kinds of movie roles as a Native American Indian, dies, sister comes out and reveals, not an Indian, he's Sicilian. Here's a trans biological son. Andrew Cadieux, this happens to lots of people, identifies as the biological son of his parents. Turns out, Andrew was adopted. Finds this out at 21 years old. Identified as a biological son, turned out not to be a biological son. The translogic principle doesn't seem to work. Here's trans age cases. It's the case of Charity Ann Johnson. Charity Ann Johnson, she's 34 years old, according to the birth certificate. She identifies as like 16 or 17, and she was in high school, living a high school student life, high school boyfriend. Okay, turns out, whoa, they find out she's not 17 years old at all. She's 34 years old. Identifies as a high school student, so must be a high school student. Here's another one, another case of a trans high school student. Anthony Avalos, he identifies as a 17 or 18-year-old, and he was playing high school basketball. He's actually like 24 years old, playing high school basketball. And one of his former coaches sees him and realizes, hey, there's something odd here, okay? He was having sex with a 14-year-old, but look, he identifies as 17 or 18, and if you're 17 or 18, it's not illegal to have sex with a 14-year-old in this country. So on this translogic rule, aren't you going to have to say, well, it's okay for him to do this then? He should be treated as a 17 or 18-year-old. Here's a trans 6-year-old girl, a trans child. Also a transgender, male to female, but also a trans child. He identifies, or she identifies, as a 6-year-old girl. Dresses as such, lives as such, demands to be treated as such. Here's a trans baby. Identifies as a baby, therefore, on the translogic rule, would be a real baby, should be treated as such. And he's collecting disability, and with these disability payments, he has these bigger cribs and playpens and toys, and he has a nurse that feeds him from a bottle, eats baby food, wears a diaper, and sleeps in a crib. Another trans baby, Willie Windsor. Windsor traced his baby obsession all the way back to his earliest memories, identifies as a baby. He came into $1 million inheritance, which allowed him to finally live as a full-time baby, wearing frilly dresses, diapers, and bonnets, constantly having a rag doll in his arms, eating Gerber baby food, demanded to be addressed as Heidi Lynn, a transgender baby, hired women to mommy him with his inheritance, and trained himself to poop in his diapers. The trans fat, anorexia. Anorexics identify as fat, as too heavy. Therefore, in the translogic rule, they are too heavy, they are too fat, should be treated as such. Well, here's Rebecca Jones. She weighs 70 pounds. That's her 7-year-old daughter. She weighs less than her 7-year-old daughter. She can wear her daughter's clothes. Rebecca Jones thinks she's too fat. Here's the trans pregnant. Carla Vanessa Perez, a Mexican woman, self-identified as being pregnant with a record 9 babies. Turns out all that was false. You can see feeling the woman's stomach. Turns out, well, she's just got a big belly. Trans royalty. Here you see Princess Emily. Emily Heaton identifies that she is the princess of the Kingdom of North Sudan. Her father actually made a journey to disputed territory between North Sudan and South Sudan, placed that flag on that territory, declaring it the Kingdom of North Sudan, so to fulfill his daughter's identity as a princess. There's a close-up shot of Princess Emily. So I'm assuming she also demands to be treated as a princess. She is, after all, a real princess on the translogic rule. The trans innocent. Robert Pinkton self-identifies as an innocent man. The Canadian government, however, demurs. The Canadian government says he's a serial killer who killed 26 women. However, he's just published an autobiography that was smuggled out of prison in which he denies that he's guilty of these things. He is an innocent man. So he is an innocent man. Should be treated as such. Immediately released on the Translogic rule. Here's a trans doctor, South Florida. You may have seen this kid. Okay? It's been in the news last 2 months. Arrested twice. Practicing medicine without a license, impersonating a doctor. This is Malachi Love Robinson. Identifies as a doctor. Didn't graduate from high school, but hey, he has an online medical degree from Missionary Seminary Chapel. So he must be a real doctor. Should be treated as such. That's how he identifies. I mean, persistent. Arrested once, right back at it. Arrested twice. A trans genius, Roy Philippos. So this guy goes to a board meeting or a shareholders meeting for Tesla Motors, Tesla electric cars. Goes to this board meeting, asks the CEO, Elon Musk or Ellen Musk, I've never heard the name really pronounced. Ask Elon Musk, look, Elon, I, Roy Philippos, am a genius. You ought, for the sake of the company, hire me immediately as vice president. Elon Musk did not. Transmaster race. Here you have the Nazi Germans. The Nazi Germans self-identified as the master race. On the translogic principle, they are the master race. And we should treat them as our masters. They should be allowed to make slaves of us all. The Transane. Here's Amanda Bynes. You may remember her. She was a big star for a while, an actress on a sitcom, What I Like About You. She's now 30 years old. On October 9th, 2014, she tweeted that her father sexually abused her as a child. Shortly after, she tweeted again that her father had not actually molested her, but he implanted a microchip in her brain that forced her to make that initial accusation. She also tweeted, I am not insane. She identifies as sane, or identified as sane, so in the translogic rule, she is sane, should be treated as such. But the very next day, she was committed to a psychiatric hospital and has been under the legal guardianship of her parents ever since. The transabled. The transabled self-identify as disabled. Here's Charlotte Wilkinson Burnett. She identifies as paralyzed from the chest down. She was a Paralympic kayaker. Olympics for the disabled. She was a kayaker, and there you see her posing with the oars. She's now been banned from the Paralympic Games. Although she identifies as paralyzed from the chest down, medical test has revealed she has nothing physically wrong with her, and she is not allowed to participate in the Paralympic events. There's another case, Mark Comer. He identified as disabled. He says he's rejected his left leg since he was about 6 years old. He wants his leg amputated. He identifies as someone without a leg. So he threw a concrete slab onto the leg, permanently damaging it. He's now confined to a wheelchair, but he wants it amputated. He wants the leg gone. He says, in all other aspects of my life, I'm completely lucid. This is the one not normal slice of my life. He feels frustration to a great degree. There's been nothing in my mind other than getting rid of this, he says, effing leg. Another case, Chloe Jennings White, she's also a transgender. She identifies as a paraplegic, as someone with no use of the legs, paraplegic. She was 4 when she first consciously decided that nature made a mistake by giving her 2 legs that actually work. She was jealous of disabled kids and envious of an aunt who needed leg braces after a bike accident. So when she was 9 years old, she tried to paralyze herself by riding her bike, but it did not work. Nonetheless, she still identifies as a paraplegic, spends most of the day in a wheelchair, and wants to be paralyzed. When I'm in the wheelchair, I'm not even thinking about the wheelchair. It's just normal for me. But anytime I'm walking, it's always on my mind. Something dominating my mind, that this is not the way it's supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be able to walk. I don't know why the thought of getting someone to permanently paralyzes me upsets people. It's the same, she says, quote, as a transsexual man having his penis cut off. It's never coming back, but they know that's what they want. She wants her to be paralyzed. Now, a doctor overseas will do it. No one in this country will do it. They'll be sued with a malpractice suit by the state authorities. But overseas doctors will do it. But apparently, it's too expensive for her. Another case. This is Jewel Shuping. She had always self-identified as blind for as long as she could remember. Apparently, she actually found someone who injected Drano into her eyes. She's now actually blind. Transpsychics. Sylvia Brown self-identifies as a psychic, able to read minds, able to see into the past, able to see into the future, able to contact your dead loved ones. Well, if that's how she self-identifies, she must be a psychic, and we should treat her this way. Consult her on very important events. Perhaps President Obama should give her a call sometime. Trans prophets. Here's Muhammad. This is a depiction, by the way, from Iran in the 1300s. An Islamic depiction of Muhammad. Well, Muhammad self-identified as the true prophet and last prophet of God. So on the Translogic rule, he is the last prophet of God, and we should treat him as such. Now, I might have some Muslims in the audience, and they're okay with that application of the principle, but non-Muslims will say, no, that just because he self-identifies that way, that doesn't mean he is. And Muslims won't grant it in the case of Joseph Smith, another trans prophet. He claims he's the prophet of God. He's the founder of Mormonism, the Church of Latter-day Saints. So he's the prophet of God, and we should treat him as such. Trans Jesus. This is Vissarion, a Russian, has a following in Russia, in Germany, and Bulgaria, has a big enclave in Siberia, in which his followers and disciples worship him. You see him trying to get his miraculous touch. Identifies as Jesus, the second coming. So therefore he is the second coming, of the Lord, of Jesus. So we should treat him as such. A trans god, Yahweh ben Yahweh, famous case here in South Florida. Yahweh ben Yahweh translates as God, Son of God. He self-identified as God. He founded the nation of Yahweh, which were a religion of black supremacists. They believed that blacks are the supreme race. He had his disobedient followers murdered. After all, God decides when you die or not, or live. Had them decapitated if they disobeyed. And he was convicted of conspiring to murder white people. He wanted murders of white people to be an initiation rite to his religious cult. There's also then otherkin. Otherkin are people who identify as non-human beings. Here's a trans elf. She identifies as an elf. Her name is Aharwain. And there's whole conventions and groups and communities of trans elves. Trans vampires. Vampire communities, vampire lifestyles are also very popular. They drink blood. Some of them think that they feed off the psychic energies of other people, and if they don't drink blood or feed off other people's psychic energy, or both, then they would surely die. Trans-alien. Here's Scott Mandelker. He identifies as an extraterrestrial alien from another planet. I have his book in my office. The title is From Elsewhere, being E.T. in America. At the back of the book, it has a handy questionnaire to help you, too, determine if you are an alien from another world. Trans-animal. Here's Nano the cat. She's Norwegian. She says she is a cat trapped in the wrong body. She hisses at dogs. She hates water and claims she can even see better at night. She has the ability to communicate simply by meowing. Nano prefers to crawl around on her legs and knees and paws at windows when she wants to go outside. She can also sleep in windowsills, but she admits she has never yet caught a mouse. Boomer the dog. Gary Matthews, 47 years old, has believed he is a dog since his childhood. He now sleeps in a doghouse, eats dog food from a bowl on the floor, and barks at passerbys and other dogs. In 2010, he tried to legally change his name to Boomer the dog, but the judge refused. He is currently unemployed. The trans dead. There's a syndrome known as Cotard's delusion, or walking corpse syndrome. People who self-identify as dead. Sufferers genuinely believe they are dead or that parts of their body no longer exist. And some have died from starvation because they feel they no longer have to eat. This is Haley Smith. One day, when I was sitting in English class, I had this really weird sensation that I was dead and I couldn't shake it. English class. She went to see the school nurse, but apparently the school nurse said there was nothing wrong with her. But Miss Smith persisted in her self-identity As I walked home, I thought about visiting a graveyard just to be close to others who are also dead. I'd fantasize about having picnics in graveyards, and I'd spend a lot of time watching horror films because seeing zombies made me feel relaxed, like I was with family. However, she went to therapy, and she also discovered that watching Disney films helped her in her recovery. The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Sleeping Beauty, and Bambi, I watched them all. And I felt, how can I be dead when Disney makes me feel this good? She's now trying to get a job in Disney World. So she self-identified as dead. Well, then she is dead, and we should treat her as such. We should have buried her, cremated her. And then finally, there's this guy, the trans wise. This guy identifies as someone who's always right about everything. So he is always right about everything and should be treated as always right about everything. You should all become my little disciples, a bunch of Nunderites. All right. What's the point of all these examples? All right. The point is, look, the translogic principle seems to have absurd or false results. If you identify as an X, then you are an X and you should be treated as an X. We say that's not true in general. So the principle itself is not true. And so you can't appeal to that principle if it's not true, if it's false. You can't appeal to it in justification of anything. You're going to have to use some other principle, some other argument. Maybe there are others. I'm just looking at this one here. Further, not only are there seemingly false results, false implications, contradictions result. And contradictions can't be true. Two people who identify as the very same exclusive X. You can imagine all kinds of cases, and there are cases like this. Here's trans Anastasia. That is the last family of the Tsars. Tsar Nicholas's family. They were murdered in 1917 by the communists in the Communist Revolution. Okay? The little girl, the little princess, was Princess Anastasia Romanov. The belief was she was killed in this massacre. However, there were people who claimed that they were Anastasia. Anna Anderson was one. Eugenia Smith was another. Living at the same time, two people self-identifying as Anastasia Romanov at the very same time. Contradiction. Can't be true, but on the translogic principle, it would have to both be true. If they identify as X, they are X. Trans prophet, I talked about Muhammad. He identifies as the prophet, the true prophet of God. Joseph Smith identifies as the true prophet of God. Contradiction. They can't both be the true prophet of God. They say absolutely opposed things. Trans greatest boxer of all time. Floyd Mayweather identifies as that. He's undefeated. Tyson Fury identifies as the greatest boxer of all time. He too's undefeated. Living at the same time. Contradiction, can't both be true. They say they could have defeated any other living or dead boxer. Can't both be true at the same time. But in the translogic principle, it would both be true at the same time. Translogic principle results in contradictions. Contradictions can't be true. So the principle has to be false. Second type of contradiction. One person identifies as two mutually exclusive X's. Same person self-identifies two mutually exclusive things or identities, or X's. Just one to show you the type of thing that can occur. Here's Enid Lee. She teaches seminars both on multiculturalism and anti-racism. She identifies as both a multiculturalist and an anti-racist. She identifies as a multiculturalist who says all cultures should be respected. Yet at the same time, she identifies as an anti-racist. Racist cultures should not be respected. Racist culture is bad. Contradiction. Both multiculturalism and anti-racism can't be true. All right. This principle has some problems. I'm hoping I'm making you think about it. 3 objections. Number 1, seemingly it would allow what we consider to be dishonesty or fraud or misrepresentation, as I said about those 2 people who were using the strap-ons. Again, if you prescind from or abstract from the strap-ons, I'm guessing you still think there's some type of misrepresentation, even if they were just making out. Just because the person self-identifies as a male doesn't really mean that is a real male. If there's nothing dishonest going on, if you think there's something dishonest going on, the translogic principle can't be true. Second problem I pointed out with all those examples in the middle, it implies absurdities, falsehoods. All these cases of the transabled, all these cases of the trans Jesus, the trans master race, and on and on and on, it seems to have false implications. And lastly, it applies contradictions. And contradictions can't be true. All right, if these objections cannot be answered, then the translogic principle is false and must be rejected. Can these objections be answered? What do you think? I'm going to give you an opportunity to be at the mic for your comments. I'd like to know what you think. For I at least hope, I have made you think today. To think clearly, to think critically, and let us always try to think clearly, think critically. For as was said by that famous French philosopher, Blaise Pascal, let us labor to think clearly, for such is the beginning of morality. Let us think clearly. Let us think critically. Let us think morally. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we do have a mic set up. If I can have one of the professors as a moderator at the mic, okay, to control the line or the questioners or the commenters. If you have any thoughts at all, any further questions, if you come down to the mic, and if you come down to the mic and speak into the mic, because we are video recording, and if you don't speak into the mic, the question or the comment isn't going to be picked up on the tape.
Professor Nunn.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is June Romero.
Right.
I identify myself as part of the trans community, a transgender person. Not necessarily with any connected description at the end of it, just a transgender person.
Right.
It seems to me, I was not here, nor was I present for the first maybe 15 or 20 minutes of your presentation.
Right.
But I can only gather from what I've seen in the last 30 or 20 rather, that this is a meeting used to, it seems to me, attack a logic, which is understandable in philosophy courses. I understand where you're headed with this. I would implore the people in this room and yourself, I don't know how educated you are on trans issues or communities of trans people. I understand that this line of thought is actually reasonable to me. I've had it myself. For many years, I struggled with understanding the logic, the ethics behind my condition. and I came to understand it maybe a year ago. And I came to understand that there are aspects and elements to being a trans person that were not iterated amongst those examples that you showed up today. Trans people's history runs much, much, much deeper and further than you understand. Many people in this room, I think. These cases we see of people trying to segue into a different lifestyle, perhaps piggybacking off the logic of trans people, is something that has occurred several times before, and it's a concern, yes, but I don't believe a point for us to knock down or attack an entire institution. I was concerned sitting back there because I felt it was a little irresponsible to be giving this content, presenting this content in this way. However, I again know I'm a stranger to your program and your ways, and I don't know how you...
And you came in 15 minutes late by your own admission.
I did. But I just want to present that to the group of people in this room, considering that I myself have noticed the population in the city in which I reside is not too inclined to listen to people of my persuasion. And I don't know if this necessarily helped, although it did give me a platform, and I do appreciate that. That's all I have to say. Thank you, President.
You're very welcome. Thank you for speaking. All right, look, in the first 15 minutes, I talked a lot about critical thinking, okay? So I know this is an issue of passion for many people, and it's deeply felt. But when it comes to philosophy and critical thinking, what matters is, are principles true? What evidence can be offered in favor of principles? What evidence objections can be offered against principles? So, the question now, so that was the context of this. I have given 3 objections for thinking the principle's not true. And I really didn't hear a response. I'm glad that you spoke at the mic, but I didn't hear a response to the 3 objections I raised to the translogic principle. You may come back again. Yeah. Yeah, by the way, you know, that's a good point. I mean, as I said at the beginning and also at the end here, the idea is to think about these things because we know this is an issue in our society. So we ought to be thinking about this. And further, the principle appealed to up here is going to have all kinds of ramifications and implications if it's allowed to stand as is. So I need, in order to be persuaded that the principle is still true, is still good, some answer has to be given in response to the objections.
I think we're existing at a time in which, well, I think we've always existed at a time in which vocabulary and wording, the structure of words is very important to how we approach issues, particularly from a philosophical perspective. I think the wording and the description that has been handed down to the general public about the trans population is perhaps a little misguided, a little too general and vague for people to truly understand what the condition implies. In my own experience, the condition was one of an aesthetic and a physical discomfort with myself. Gender dysphoria as described physically. Now, of course, dysphoria meaning any sort of strange emotion we receive. But this became a constant occurrence in my life, one that impeded me doing regular things, going to school, thinking about my future, even projecting myself into the future. I attack this from this perspective as well, a philosophical one. My mind is inclined in that direction. I don't know why. But I came to the conclusion that it is a condition which I bear and I must live with, and I must find solutions to allow myself to live in this human realm in which I have circumstances and conditions to live under. I think the description of people like myself should be expanded a little more detailed for people to understand properly. I think that we've been sold this sort of market package. This is a trans person, this is what they believe, and this is what you must treat them as. I don't agree. I think we are simply people, and we have our own conditions that everybody should be privy to as well. And I understand your approach to the fear of fraud becoming more prevalent in our society. However, I think we're narrowing in on a community again. I think these issues are not anything new to the human race. I think that they exist in many facets all around in many communities. However, that's all I'll say, and because I'm still thinking about it myself constantly every day. But I do appreciate this platform, and I do appreciate the discussion you're opening.
I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're giving voice, okay? All right, so, and I don't expect you to have a conclusive answer right now, okay? You've just been presented with these types of ideas and these types of concerns or objections.
I've had them my entire life.
Okay, and, okay, well, and I don't expect anybody else to have a firm idea. The idea was to think critically, to think about these issues. All right, now, now you describe that you've always found that you've been inclined that way.
You mean this kind of thought process?
Yeah, as a transgender. is
Well,
what
no,
I'm
I meant philosophically inclined. I didn't mean in terms of my condition.
Okay. Well, what I wonder is, do you or do you not accept what I call the translogic principle of a self-identity rule?
I accept it under certain circumstances, like many people accept everything. When I first read that the Supreme Court judges cases on a case-by-case basis purely, I understood how intelligent that was because of how many factors are dependent on so many things that are out of our control case by case. I think that if a person is adamant about expressing themselves in a certain form, you as a fellow human owe them the respect of perhaps seeing that expression through. Maybe on the other side, we might achieve a different community. I think that we all come from a specific place. I would say predominantly patriarchal, predominantly democratic societies. I think that those things have left great stains on our psyches and how things should function. When someone comes along and shows you how something can function differently, it is difficult to cede your own way of thinking and perhaps adopt theirs. I think that this is a discussion that we should have more amongst one another as opposed to outside these groups. Because another thing is that people in my demographic or my community are not accustomed to taking the microphone and talking about these things. The shame, the fear, the misunderstanding, and the anxiety is too great at times. In fact, I almost considered not coming down because the nerves are so great. I think that there should be more discussion. That's all. I don't necessarily reject everything you have put forth in that. However, I do tussle with it sometimes, emotionally, psychologically, and ethically, considering that there's no other point from which we're hearing another defense. However, taking it back to your logic about identifying as an X, well, it depends. What is the X? Is the X a woman? Is the X simply a feminine creature? Is the X a cat, which is a little absurd to me? However, absurdity exists. Many absurdities have become realities over the course of human life. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay, well, go ahead. Okay, by absurdity, I mean, absurdity in my sense, in my philosophical sense, also means false, okay? So when I mean absurdities, I mean obviously false or evidently false conclusions, okay? Not just that they're strange, but that evidently false, okay? All right, now, you said, well, when it comes to female, you agree with the principle.
Well, not necessarily.
When X is a female. Well, when X is a cat, it's not. What about when X is a race? What about when X is master race? What about X is disability? You see, the thing is now what you're forced to do is, you're telling me you do not accept that self-identity principle itself alone. You are telling me that principle is false by itself. It needs to be qualified. It needs to be modified somehow by, you're going to have to put in some type of objective condition that has to be fulfilled to distinguish the cases in which it is in true application from the cases it is not in true application. And I have seen the attempts made to fulfill that qualification. Okay, that has to be fulfilled to distinguish the true cases from the false cases. I have never seen one that works. That is, that's going to eliminate all the examples I had up there that were false. For example, let's suppose somebody says, well, look, it works when it's female because When it's female, it's often the case that people will tell you they've always felt this way. That won't be an objective condition. So the idea is you modify the principle this way. If you self-identify as an X, and you always have identified as an X, then you are an X and should be treated as such. You add that in there to try to make it true. Without it, it's not true.
I don't know, Professor Dunder.
Okay,
I can only speak
well,
from
let me
my
show you what
perspective.
happens. Let me show you what happens. That won't work because it's now going to have to, you're going to have to say, well, if any of these other cases have identified that way for as long as they remember, they too must now be true. And I specifically read out some of the cases. They always felt that they were disabled. Okay? They always felt that they were, a dog or whatever. They've always felt that, they were a master race, that they were superior to everybody else, okay? They've always felt these types of things. Rachel Dolezal says she's always felt to be black. She's never identified as white. White describes nothing about, she says, okay? The transabled identify as disabled. So, and what I'm taking it is that people are going to say, well, wait a minute. No, it doesn't work in those cases. So that means that qualification clause, as long as you've always felt that way, that's not going to work either. It gets you wrong results. It's probably also going to get you contradictions too. Okay? It could be the case that two people have always felt a certain way, and it turns out they can't both be that same thing at the same time. If two people both believe that they profits for as long as they remember, that can't both be true. Okay? So that modification will work. So then the next question is, all right, that one doesn't work. Is there another one that can be plugged in so that's when it works, and if you don't meet that additional qualification in there, it doesn't work? I don't expect you to have that. The whole thing is about thinking. Can there be a clause, can there be a modification to that self-identity rule that can save, on the one hand, what we're saying about transgenders, that if I identify as a female, then that person is a female and should be treated that way? Can it save the transgender case, whereas at the same time not allowing all these other cases in? You see?
Right.
And what I have found in the studies that I've done, I've only done it for this particular presentation, okay? So I too am looking and trying to learn. What I have found is none of the proposed modifications, none of the proposed qualifications to that principle ends up doing the job. So the challenge then is, if you think there's something true about transgenderism, and there's something false about many, at least some of these other cases, that you will not admit they're really that way, you are going to have to come up with some modifier, some qualification to plug into that principle to make it all work.
But I don't. I don't reject the truth of these cases. And I don't intend to eradicate these cases in order to give my truth more legitimacy. My truth comes with its own large stack of aspects. Also, I think we should steer away from considering these extreme sort of placements you have put the transgender community on. From what I hear, not saying your understanding is such, the spectrum is large. When you see somebody who you may register as female visibly, they may not register themselves that way. We're talking about a community that spans maybe 1 million Americans, and amongst those 1 million Americans, each of them has an echelon they consider to be themselves, not each individually, but most people have an echelon they consider themselves to be in the spectrum of gender and sexuality. These are things introduced to us not just through biology, but through social structures and sexual attitudes. I don't mean to do away with these people who believe they are cats and elves.
If you just hang on for just a moment, think about what you're saying then. Then you're saying that if the Nazis self-identify as the master race, then they are the master race. Okay, wait a minute. And they should be treated as the master race. All right, so I want you got to get clear on what the grave implications are of saying that this principle is true in general, okay? That should make you pause. Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, when Nazi Germans self-identify as a master race, it does not follow that they are.
It does.
Or that they should be treated that way.
But why does the logic, it seems to me, and I've done canvassing of my own, why does the logic of transgender communities just seem more feasible than citing some race as the major race?
Well, here's a problem.
To most people around the world.
It may seem feasible to people of the transgender community and perhaps their allies, but I have to tell you, the vast majority of this country does not accept that a transgender male is indeed a real male. They don't. Okay, so I'm just saying. So you're going to say, well, look, we don't accept it when it comes to Nazi German claims of being a master race. The problem is the majority doesn't accept it when it comes to transgenders either. So here's another attempted. You're thinking this way through, okay? Another attempted way to try to distinguish transgenders on the one hand from trans master racists on the other hand. One thing was, well, look, do people in general accept this claim? And so the idea was, that's the additional clause you'd put in there. So the principle works as long as, in general, people accept the claim. All right, so the people in general reject the Nazi claim to supremacy, but the thing is, the majority of people also reject the transgender claim. So what we see is that modification, that qualification of the principle doesn't work. It doesn't get you what you want. You want to save transgenderism and eliminate trans master racism, right?
Again, I said I did not. It's a matter of...
You don't, okay.
I don't. I
Or
don't because that would mean...
You're not really fully grasping, I think.
I know what you're saying, Dr. Nunda. I understand the concept you're presenting
let me finish. Fully grasping the implications of accepting Nazi Germans as the master race and should be treated as the master race. Okay, if you have any idea of the history of Nazi Germany, that should give you great pause.
I understand. You know what I'd like the opportunity to do, Dr. Nunda, is comprise something of my own. Perhaps, you know, a paper or some sort of presentation of my own. It seems that there are stark differences which have yet to particularly identify, but there are differences in between the realities you're presenting and accepting these different realities because of the circumstances they come tied with. If I were to accept somebody as the master race, that would mean I was the minor race or the inferior race, and that would mean proper imprisonment, that would mean probably warfare. I don't know what that would intend.
No, that would mean your willing submission to the Nazi overlords.
Right. Which I wouldn't be willing to do.
We find that ridiculous, right?
Yes.
So that's we're out of time. I thank you very much for your contributions. I am glad you were here. I commend you for the courage to get up to that mic and to say what you've done. I know it takes courage, okay? I know you're not used to it. I know you've been presented with these types of objections for the first time. For you to come up here and to take the heat like this, I commend you, okay?
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for being here.